Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is a campfire style session where we would like to talk with you and get your ideas and feedback about what the heck the future of online art collections might be. My name is Rob Stein, and I'm the Deputy Director and Chief Experience Officer at the Milwaukee Art Museum. And I have a fabulous colleague. Kantara, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Kantara Souffrant, and I'm the Curator of Community Dialogue at the Milwaukee Art Museum. And that means that I oversee adult programming, and I also work on building sustainable community partnerships throughout our city, especially those that center Black and Brown audiences.
Kantara and I have been in dialogue with each other about Milwaukee Art Museum's own strategies concerning our online collections. And through that work, there's a lot of things we're wrestling with and thinking about, and would appreciate the chance to workshop it with you all. We are going to share with you 3 of the ideas we've been wrestling with, but I'd also like to give you a heads up that we would love your ideas that depart from those. We would love for you to critique the ones that we share, help us figure out what would be hard or wrong about them. You could also say what might be right about them. That would be cool too. And we hope to maybe navigate this space a little bit together. Before we get rolling, Kantara, would you mind kind of giving us a lowdown on just how we'll run the session today?
Yeah, so again, Rob and I are really seeing this as an informal conversation. So if you can be on video, that would be great, because there's a lot of theater kids in this space, or former theater kids. So we feed off of each other's energies, and you all are so beautiful. So let's just share space. However, I also understand that many of us are working, caregiving, etc. So if you need to be off camera for whatever reason, if you need to eat while on camera, this is your space. Let's work it for however way makes you feel comfortable. And please be active in the chat if that's the way that you feel most comfortable engaging with us. Rob and I will be monitoring that. This D&D channel on the Slack is a really popular idea.
All right, we're back to screen sharing. We've already done our introductions, so we don't need to spend any more time there. I just wanted to start out a little bit for you to tell us who you are, just as a poll question. Aaron, if we could get that online, that would be great. A little bit of your background in the museum, or not in the museum, if you're coming from a consultant or company or someplace outside. We're seeing some great results, lots of technologists in the group. We'll share those back with you in just a second. And let's, Aaron, close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, great. And share the results. So we come from lots of different places. It looks like, no surprise for a Museum Computer Network conference, that there are a lot of technologists in the group. I hope many of you have some perspectives on online collections we can talk about. Okay, thank you, Aaron. We'll stop sharing now for a while. I just wanted to lay some ground truths here, and just to point out that online art collections have been a part of this Muse Tech landscape for a long time. In fact, mid-1990s, it would be. And if you're doing math, yeah, that's over 3 decades. Just so that we all, embrace how much progress we've made. I think I see a couple of folks that were involved in this project called AMICO, or the Art Museum Image Consortium, which was founded in the mid-90s, 1997. And startlingly enough, by the year 2000, had upwards of 50,000 artworks from across 20-some institutions, all shared in an online space. There's some screenshots of it that maybe disappointingly don't look all that different from many of our online collections these days. But so that was 2020, call it 2 years ago. Now, not to sell us short, there have been a ton of really important technical advances that have been made during this same time period. I think especially the rapid digitization that many places have embarked upon, making those objects available online, kind of the advent of open access and Creative Commons licensing that has occurred in that 30-year period. We've done a lot of work to standardize both metadata schemas and imaging specifications. And we've seen a proliferation of API access to collections that have made them more accessible, but I would argue not actually all that accessible. And yet, sort of the takeaway from this is that our users are still left with a screen full of thumbnails. And I'm just using our own at Milwaukee Art Museum example of what our online collection looks like. And this is one we just launched recently. But as we were doing that, right, I'm thinking to myself, all right, how different is this from the user's perspective than what it's been for 30 years? We really haven't fixed this user value problem that I think we've been struggling with. We've spent a lot of time and we've spent a lot of money working on the technical advances, but I don't think we've really carried our users very far forward in that period of time. So kind of the question that we want to wrestle with a little bit today is, what would it take to transform all of those investments that we've made for dozens of years in online collections into a vibrant and inclusive asset for the communities that we're working to engage with? So how might we reimagine the future of online collections to tackle some new challenges? So we wanted to really fully embrace the idea of a campfire session, because I think we would be smarter from your knowledge than from our own. So there's kind of grab your s'mores, sit around the campfire with us. There's three things that we're going to do. Kantara and I are going to pitch you three what we think might be transformative ideas that Milwaukee Art Museum may in fact experiment with. We would love you to share with us your own ideas for transforming collections that you may be sitting on or cooking up at your own institutions. And then together, I would love if we could be both self-critical and mutually critical and really trying to work this through. Kantara, does that sound about right?
That sounds great, Rob. Thank you.
So, the way we're going to do this, Kantara and I, we're going to ping pong back and forth, and I'll explain an idea, and Kantara and I have already talked about for whom this idea may actually be valuable. The first one is that we know and understand that there is algorithmic bias, right? And how we code an online collection determines what gets seen or what doesn't get seen. That decision may be that we say we're going to alphabetize our collection, or it may be something as displaying highlighted works or the most viewed works. But could we potentially think about steering that algorithm in a new way to highlight different parts of our collection for different reasons? And Kantara, we've had a couple of good examples.
Yeah, so the images that you're seeing now really bookend why the idea of the algorithm and what we put on the website is really important. So the horizontal image that you see, I'm moving my cursor so you can see what I'm pointing at, but the image on the left, which includes a group of people, thank you, Rob, who are attending a program called Lakeside at MAM, and they're enjoying outdoor yoga, which was really popular this summer. And this was a free program that brought a variety of people to our campus, a variety of Black and Brown identified people, many of whom were then given free tickets to come to the museum, right? So it's a low stake entry and invitation to sort of get to know our museum. what images might they see on the website if they are a totally new user who's really excited or thinking about coming to the museum, but they don't actually know what's available, and they're used to feeling historically excluded from the museum. So that's one user, the person who doesn't often come to the museum and is coming to our website for the first time to figure out what can they do, what might they see that might reflect their cultural histories and interests. The image on the right is someone who has visited the museum often in a program that we have that's called the Junior Docent School Program. So in this program, students come from grades 3 to 5 several times, and they learn about what it means to look at a work of art and experience a variety of tours. And it culminates in their 5th grade junior docent graduation, where they often recreate a work of art. And this young student is recreating this Nick Cave sound suit. So on the left, you have the image of people who've never been to the museum, don't really know what they're looking for, but they know that they're used to feeling like they haven't seen themselves reflected in the content. On the right is someone who's really familiar and is looking for something specific on the website and knows how to navigate it, right? So needs no help from us. How do we create an online collection that allows us to feed and respond to both needs?
So as Kantara and I were talking about this, the idea of serendipity came up, that right now we kind of leave that sorting of the screen of thumbnails, right? We don't think about it a whole lot, but how would you create serendipitous moments by making different choices about what kinds of art we highlight and feature, which listings come up higher in the search results? We know that we can boost and manipulate search listings, and I think we've talked a lot about algorithmic bias being a bad thing. Is there a way we could flip that on its head and make algorithmic bias a good thing if we're intentioning it for a different set of serendipities? So that was idea number 1. Idea number 2 is recognizing the fact that our online art collections have really been focused around scholarly art historical content. And would we consider using all those same tools that we've built to highlight scholarly content to instead highlight and archive indigenous and community knowledge, perhaps alongside our own scholarship, perhaps on its own? Again, I think all the tools we've built could be used and repurposed if we intentioned it differently. But we had a couple of examples where, for us anyways, that could be really meaningful.
So one way that I like to think about this is, how do we use this as a way of also capturing non-text-based knowledge and knowledge that is often from oral histories and traditions and centers communities of color and indigenous communities. So you'll see here 3 different examples. The ones on the left are fish decoys, which are really important to Native American indigenous communities, particularly communities in Wisconsin, which is where a lot of our fish decoys emerge. And when you see the fish decoy, it really doesn't allow you to understand what happens when you share the fish decoy in space and allow people to talk about their histories, how the fish decoy really documents a way of living and knowing and a tradition of art making that is rooted in cultural practices and ways of being in the world. The image in the middle is an image of, in our Haitian art collection, the center point of our space is a laku, which comes from the Haitian cultural tradition of placemaking. So the laku, there's a few different definitions of it, but essentially the laku functions as a center or courtyard, a space for gathering people. And our laku sits at the heart of our Haitian collection, and it's been used as a multi-purpose space, very much in the ways of Haitian cultural life. It's a space where performances happen, a space where people are encouraged to sit and have a respite in the museum. But how do we translate that oral tradition, that cultural way of being from this physical space onto our online collection? And the last image is an image of Ronnie Preston, who is a performer for our Lakeside at Mam Summer Experience. And Ronnie Preston is from the San Carlos Apache Nation. And Ronnie really uses his performances, hello theater kids, to tell the history and speak on cultural practices and traditions and ways of being, from Native dress to how he's to the performance engagements and opportunities that he creates. So how do you take all of these oral histories, all these cultural ways of being and knowing, and how do you plug them into an online collection? What are the ways of doing that?
Mm-hmm. This is one where I can think off the top of my head of some really challenging issues in terms of ownership and whose voice is selected to be collected and archived. I see Amanda has some experience with it. So as we come back into this in discussion, would love where you have thoughts and experiences on these areas, if you'd be willing to share them. So the third idea of 3 is, would we be willing to, in fact, give these investments that we've made all together to other local creators or smaller arts organizations for them to use to host their own online collections? Kantara and I were talking about the long tail, and I think that's probably some terminology familiar to this group, but the idea being that there are altogether more, in this case, objects and art created than is currently featured on the largest of our online collections. And so I think where we've solved a number of the technical challenges at the large scale of large institutions, could we double dip those investments and in fact use it to help put online the long tail of creativity that's currently buried due to lack of expertise, lack of access to funding, and in our communities that surfaces in a lot of different ways. And so Kantara and I were thinking about 2 particular people who are close to the museum.
Yeah, so those 2 individuals, and thank you for the folks who are dropping information in the chat. I really appreciate it. So those 2 individuals that we're thinking of are Miss Evelyn Patricia Terry on the left and Miss Della Wells. Both of them are really well respected and locally and nationally and internationally known artists. And Miss Evelyn Patricia Terry in particular has written a manuscript that explores Wisconsin Black artists from about the 1960s to the 2000s. And both of them have given a lot of their archival material to the Milwaukee Art Museum. So we know that we are a space that people understand has the capacity, and we do have the capacity to archive and steward and to hold on to material and care for it for future generations. The question then is, how do we create an online resource and platform that allows us to do this and share out this information, the content community-wide? How can we be of service to our communities through our online collections? Including like something such as a project that we're currently undertaking, which is thinking about how to collectively midwife Miss Terry's book into the world in a way that multiple people have access to it. And maybe the museum doesn't own it, but we help to steward the publication of it.
Awesome. And thank you to Jessica for sharing the terms around folksonomy into the chat. Yeah, in some ways, this point number 2 about cultivating and archiving alternative forms of knowledge is related to folksonomy, but it's also related to what the museum intends to value in terms of knowledge collection and keeping. I think many years ago, a good colleague of mine, Mia Ridge, who's at the British Library, we were in I think might have even been an MCN session talking about social media and user-generated content. And her point was, if we really valued what people had to say about our collections, we'd be archiving all of our social media channels. And I don't really think that anyone's yet to do that for themselves. But what do we choose to archive and keep, and what we don't? I think those are value statements on what the museum thinks about knowledge outside of scholarship. But so in terms of summarizing, we pitched you 3 ideas. I think Kantara and I, neither of us are convinced that any of the 3 of them are perfect or necessarily even a good idea. But I think without spending too much time in presentation, we'd really like to understand more about your experiences. And at this point, I might just go off of screen share so we can see each other again. We'd encourage you to use the chat. Feel free to unmute yourselves and share. And Kantara and I will try to keep the conversation flowing as well. And I already see, I'm sorry, I can't see names in this, but if you have your hand raised, please go ahead and ask your question.
I see Cassie.
Cassie,
Yeah.
thank you.
So I actually, on the note of the changing the algorithm, I think it's really interesting that that came up because that's something, a discussion we've been having sort of back and forth with our curators and our director about our own collections online. And it always comes back to the audience, because the issue is that what seems serendipitous to the audience seems, orderly to us as staff members. So for example, right now things are ordered by their accession number, and there's a lot of accidental stumbling and finding and seeing things that you wouldn't normally see next to each other in that case. But when we try and make things more orderly in a way that would be visible to the public, then it seems like completely nonsensical organization to the back of house staff, to our curators, to our registrars, things like that. So we're still trying to figure out, how do we find a system that makes sense to both of those needs? So a scholar could find something, and someone who's just interested in looking at the art could do it.
That's a really good point, Cassie. Thank you for raising it. Yeah, how we collect and organize, and what we choose to collect, and how it is or is not connected to existing content channels is a big hurdle. Erin, I see you with your hand up too.
Hi, I always have lots to say, so feel free to not call on me whenever you feel like it. So a couple things. We'll be talking, my team and I will be talking about sharing a collection database among multiple disparate organizations on November 9th. So come hear what we have to say then. But this relates because we just put a message on our public portal at the bottom. That's basically the intention of the message was about, we don't know all provenance for all these objects. Here's an email address if you have a problem or need to know something or whatever. And we've gotten a huge number of people asking us or informing us about things, which is great. But as part of the project that we're working on, we also know that there are records that have so much information in them, and then there are records that are empty. So I feel like if you get served a popular thing, you should also get served an empty record and see if people can fill it in, like help us. I think in order to do that, we need to admit that we are not perfect, and everything does not look like water lilies on the internet. And that's going to take some ego puncturing on our parts before that is successful. And I think, frankly, for any of these ideas, there's a big curatorial, and this is how we do things. And if I have to share my knowledge with others, then I am thereby not valuable anymore. There's a whole bunch of emotional baggage that goes with that.
Yeah.
But I'm way in favor of doing it.
So Erin, thank you for that, because I feel like it really goes to the heart of some of the work that we're doing, and it comes out of our strategic direction, which I would also say is, it doesn't use these terms, but the strategic direction could be translated as a way of thinking about decentering and acknowledging our colonial practices in museums, right? So from the fish decoys to why oral histories and traditions aren't often valued as knowledge or scholarship, I feel like that's some of the work that we've been doing alongside our Native Advisory Group, for example. Like, those records that are empty are often deliberately empty, right? It's not that people don't have the knowledge or the content to share that. So thank you for that. I see Mark and Kira. Apologies if I mispronounce any names.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I was just going to speak quickly. These thoughts have been on our mind a lot here at the Low Art Museum. And so we tried for an NEH Digital Humanities grant that focused on data visualization, but thinking about this idea of changing the algorithm. And so we were thinking deeply about what kind of filters do you use for search? And obviously everything goes back to who's created the existing filters, et cetera. And it was centered around the idea of hosting a series of community forums to better understand the idea of, if you were to search and look through collections, what are some of the search fields and things that you would be using? And the idea was to sort of build out a unique approach to filters and searching that would open up how people could access, look at the collection, and then get these kind of unique, curated, engaging experiences through data visualization. So the Low Art Museum is part of the University of Miami, and I was partnering with some faculty members who were on the back end who would have done all this coding and created this sort of experimental thing. And the idea was to use a specific cohort of the collection. We did not get the grant, so it did not get to do that. But just wanted to mention two other things that I've seen lately. So Wikidata and Wikimedia are doing some really interesting work with data visualization related to how you source and look at things, and then this kind of interconnectivity between different information and objects. That's really worth looking at. And then I think most people on this call are familiar, obviously, with IIIF things going on in terms of not having just those thumbnails to look at and having engaging experiences with collection management systems.
Thanks for that, Mark. Those are really good observations, and there's a whole variety of tools at our disposal that I think really don't run into the typical problem we run into, which is money, right? We've actually already spent money here, and we have built things that I think we can reuse and turn around. In the chat, coming off of the question around folksonomy, the Steve.Museum project was mentioned as an experiment, I think beginning in 2005 and originating at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was a project I led in Indianapolis for a number of years. And one of the things that the project was centered around is that our audiences don't speak the same language as our curators do when we talk about works of art. So if your online collection system only describes objects in the ways that your curators do, when somebody wants to run a search, they may not know the correct terminology to use to find it. Interestingly, what we found is that when you asked users a really specific question about a work of art, they had really interesting things to say. It seems like an aha moment, but it's also a head slapping moment. Like, of course they have interesting things to say. I think would point you to, I don't know if Diana Folsom is on this call, but Diana has been doing a lot of great work around cataloging indigenous objects with native tribes who are adding their own textual descriptions about what the ritual use of objects would be, or what the daily use of objects would be, that were never contained in the collections management system. But Kira, you've had your hand raised and you've been very patient.
Hi, so I just have to add, because Mark mentioned IIIF, that I'm an exhibit designer, so this digital pivot, like online collections, is not something that I have a lot of experience in, but we use IIIF, and my interest is in making online collections more engaging. I think we've all been probably to exhibits, physical and virtual, where you just kind of like sit back, cross your arms and look at things, and it's not that engaging. And I try to do that in physical exhibits to like make things more tactile, more interactive, and IIIF, trying to figure out how to use IIIF to make that happen in the digital realm as well. But I also wanted to talk about, we're currently doing a lot of imaging at my institution, and the projects, the collections that get picked for those imaging projects are usually selected by leadership, and the leadership selects those based on like donor interests or curatorial interests. And we have area experts in our curatorial team, but that doesn't cover, theoretically an international organization, but we don't have curators for all areas of the world. And so projects that get selected aren't as international as we'd like them to be, aren't as diverse as we'd like to think they are. And oftentimes they're these big kind of blockbuster collections. And so I think, like we've mentioned the algorithm before and how to get digital records in front of people that aren't as popular big blockbusters, but we don't even have those things. We're not even imaging those things. So I don't know if there's other people who are experiencing that and how to balance that. I know on an individual level, we know that it's not right, but we don't know how to institutionalize changes when leadership wants to put their resources in those big blockbuster projects.
That's a really good point. And that goes to so I think if there was an overarching theme of Kantara and I's discussion, it's intention, right? We have the ability to digitize. What is our intention? I can't claim any credit for it. The Milwaukee Art Museum had made this proposal before I arrived, but recently got funded by the IMLS to digitize 3,000 works by underrepresented artists in the collection that have no online records. So that intention, we know how to do that. We do that work all the time. What we're finding is that actually doing the cataloging work of underrepresented objects is the hardest part, and representing artists who may or may not want to be identified in a particular way, and understanding how to describe that is also a challenge to do sensitively. I know it's something that the Association of Art Museum Curators is talking about actively, but where we may have a good intention of highlighting underrepresented artists, the process of categorizing someone's art as underrepresented is itself really complex.
I want to add to this the complexity with a lot of Andrea's great comments in terms of maybe there's just too much stuff, which makes me think about an issue of capacity, but also as an audience member, like capacity in terms of viewing and being able to really dive in. So does it mean that the output of labor actually like translates into people coming and interfacing with it? So I wanted to translate that or drop that in the chat, as well as Andrew's question about ephemerality and online content. I want to bookmark that. Yvonne, I see that you have your hand raised.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for facilitating this conversation. I'm sitting here thinking about this and realizing that a lot of this really has to do with this sort of organizational underpinnings, the culture, the intent, as you said, the focus and the resources that are poured into efforts like this. And so I just wanted to make two comments. One is that at the Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens, we are piloting a digitization council that's made up of the heads of the library art. Well, we're starting out small for now, so it's library and art. Botanical is not represented, but we have a member of advancement, communications, and our DEI committee. And eventually, after the pilot goes through 2 rounds, we're hoping to open up that council to others as well. So thinking really intentionally and having a multitude of perspectives in the room to determine large scale and medium scale digitization projects, I think is something that's really interesting and then or fantastic and really promising, I think. And then the second thing that I wanted to say is, as much as possible, like I've been building into everyone that I'm talking with here, cataloging is forever, right? And maybe cataloging isn't even the right term. Maybe it's description, because cataloging sort of assumes a very narrow understanding that's, routed in library and information sciences and, this whole sort of distinction of professionals, paraprofessionals, and those who are anointed with the right to be able to describe. And I think building this idea of like description is forever, maybe not cataloging is forever, is also something that's really healthy to sort of socialize within our organizations, our institutions, this idea of like, we're never going to be done. Language continues to change context. continues to change. And for us to try to lay claim to that is folly, bound to fail. But if we can start to think about this as something that we will continue to pour sustainable and ongoing resources into, perhaps we might just maybe do a better job of making our institutions more welcoming places.
Yvonne, I really like that. Thank you for sharing that. And I think you have you've established a couple of memes that are being picked up in the chat. It reminds me of a story that our head of library and archives told me just last week. She has been working with volunteers even through the pandemic, one of whom is an EMT dispatcher by profession who likes to volunteer in the library and archives to help catalog or describe. And that person said that in their professional life, they spend so much time dealing with the dark side of the world and dealing with people in high stress, that spending time to help describe beautiful things in works of art and culture feels like putting the world back in order again. And so that stuck with me, that, you know, even though the description is forever, actually the experience of describing can be really valuable to our visitors as well. I see Aaron and I see Josh. Too bad we can't thumb wrestle over Zoom.
Josh, take it away. I already went once.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Just a response to the last comment. I'm at the Art Institute of Chicago, and Ilya is on my team and here as well. And I agree, I want more of our collection to have narrative descriptions. But the reality is there is an editorial process that is cumbersome and I don't have a lot of control over. Where I do feel there's a huge amount of power in connecting disparate parts of the collection through cataloging, through taxonomy, and breaking them out of the silos of curatorial departments, and connecting things through subject tags or other ways across time spans, geography, cultures. So I don't want to dismiss just the data associated with the objects and how they can actually lead people down those rabbit holes of discovery and serendipity.
Thank you, Josh. Aaron?
I really appreciated, Yvonne, what you had to say about cataloging as forever. One of my former jobs, I was cleaning out an office and I found almost an entire file drawer of printed out collection records from the database that were hand edited because they were going online. They were hand corrected because somebody was going to put them online, and God forbid there would be a typo in there, because it was not ingrained that web content is editable at any time. And I think that perception that when you put something on the internet, it is the same as publishing a physical book, the same as putting, you know, tiny vinyl letters on a wall. You don't want to have to close the exhibition because there's a typo in that title panel. And I think our approach as institutions to the internet is the same as our approach to physical gallery experiences and physical publications. And it's an entirely different thing. And I think museums are suffering again from trying to do the same thing the same way in a different format.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're totally right. Putting things on a wall in vinyl, etching them in stone, or writing them onto the internet. There's three different versions of permanence. It does, I think, connect to this ephemerality conversation. It's going in chat. I'm wondering if Andrea, Coven, Chad, Jessica would mind surfacing a little bit in audio for us too.
Yeah, I'm happy to, though, with the disclaimer that I do have a 2 p.m. Central meeting, so I hate to sort of just like drop this and run.
Drop the mic.
Yeah, well, maybe not the mic, but I wrote in response to Coben because he does raise a good point that like to say that the solution here is just to generate less stuff is not typically helpful, right? But I am more interested in sort of interrogating that like maybe the archive isn't the best place to keep this if it's designed to disappear or if it resists the means of being kept for a duration of time, right? Which I think might be a more actionable way to spin that question. And I also say this with the note that I have no plans for representing collections in my new job so far, but this has been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, time has flown. I didn't even realize it was that close to 2 o'clock. Robin, I see your hand up. Would you like the last word?
I'll try and be very, very brief. And the Brooklyn Museum last year, they did a Lorraine O'Grady show, and they put the show not in one gallery, but they sprinkled it through the whole museum. So when you went to see, you walked through the Egyptian collection and you walked through the furniture collection. And it was so interesting because I go to the museum a lot, but I don't go to those different galleries all the time. And I was just wondering, I'm just throwing it out there, potentially there's some sort of digital analogy to this that would allow you to, you know, to make connections between things that you would never otherwise make connections with, and in that way create the kind of serendipity and surfacing of things that people don't get to see very often with a kind of a rationale to it, you know.
That makes sense.
I don't know if that's the last word, but quiet now. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you to all of you for being good colleagues and for debating with us. Kantara, also thank you to you for being my brainstorming friend. And I know that we would both be really interested in continuing this conversation with all of you offline, or just dial us up someday. It would be fun. But thanks again.
Thank you.